Good morning. Welcome to class today. Today we're in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and we're going to talk about leadership. So I want to ask you a question at the beginning. Who is the best leader you've ever known? Now, there are always these different kinds. We call them different things, I suppose. There may be teachers who have really instilled something in you, or an athletic coach who built your discipline in a way that you had never thought of before. Or there may be a preacher or someone else who has really benefited your life. Those are all leaders, by the way. They may not be formal titles, but that's what they are. I know I have one. I had a very dear friend who was an elder of mine in one of my previous churches. We did a lot of things together, and he knew how to correct me in a way that I didn't feel crushed, which is not usually the pattern with a lot of people. He knew exactly what to say at exactly the right time to get the best out of me. We remained close the rest of his life. He died in April of this year, and I still miss him for those reasons. But today we want to talk about leadership in a different format. Usually our passage today, we tend to tackle when we're selecting elders. And we hurry through it, and we have a couple of Sundays, and let's just get through all this stuff because we've got busy things to do to select leaders. Today, though, I want us to hover over this. I want to take off the pressure that comes because we are in a hurry to get something done. Instead, we want to savor what Paul really talks about for leadership. After all, he says that he is there to tell you how to behave in the household of God, and part of that is the order that it has as its leadership. Today, we're going to talk about things that are not what you may have been used to. We have some interesting ideas about leadership that I think when we come to this passage, we need to dispense with. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Leaders are important. They always have been in the New Testament church. When you read the very opening pages of the book of Acts, for instance, it's not long before you come to Acts chapter 6 when there is this crisis going on where people need to be fed. The disciples, if they do it, they are going to take away their primary responsibility and they're going to be diverted, and therefore the things that need to get done won't get done, and the things that really are pressing may not be done as well. And so we're told in Acts chapter 6 and verses 1 through 4, now in these days the disciples were increasing in number, and a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. And the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples and said, "It is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good report, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word." This was a case of what we need someone to take over this situation. And they had all kinds of requirements, but they let the people do the selection, which is a very interesting thing. Will I follow this person? Is the question that's being asked. So from the very first, it was like that. When Paul goes on his first missionary journey, he makes his way through Asia Minor. And as he's making his way back to Antioch, Syria, he does one simple thing. It tells us in Acts chapter 14, 21 to 23, that he appointed elders for them in every church with prayer and fasting by committing them to the Lord whom they had believed. One of the things he saw as critical to the future of these fledgling infant churches he has just planted is they were going to need strong leadership. And so he did not dispense with that, but said this is an essential. So he ordains, that's our word, he ordains, or he institutes, appoints elders in these churches. But we also know they already had elders in Ephesus. When you come to Acts chapter 20, Paul, long before he writes the book of 1 Timothy, long before his first letter, probably 3 to 5 years, You already know that in Ephesus there are elders because when Paul comes, it says, now from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called the elders of the church to come to him. They already had elders there. But when he writes First Timothy, one thing he's trying to emphasize is the church going forward. What will happen when he's not there? How will leadership be? What will it look like? What does it need to be? And because of that, I think that when we study this passage today, we need to kind of take this big picture look before we take the small picture look of individual pieces. Why do we need leadership? Why is that essential? Well, without leadership, people don't know which way to go. Now, one of the images of the New Testament is that we are like sheep. And as Jesus said in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 36, when he looked over at the multitudes, he said, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, for they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He said sheep needed shepherds. Now, you may not understand that, but I do, and I do it for a simple reason. I had some experience. In our first full-time work, Vicki and I lived basically in the middle of a pasture next to the church building, which is out in the middle of the country. On two sides, there was this pasture that a man kept sheep in. And we would watch sheep on a daily basis. It was about the only entertainment there was when we were there. And you would watch these sheep and you would find some interesting things about them. Sheep had no sense of consequence at all. They would eat all the grass off the ground until there was nothing left to eat and they'd starve to death. Or if they were eating, they would keep their head down, their teeth to the grass, and they would eat and eat and eat and keep moving as long as there was grass, and they would eat themselves over a cliff if they had to. They were totally unaware of predators until it was too late. I looked at those things and I realized that when you look at what Paul's trying to say here, we're like sheep without a shepherd if we don't have leadership. We don't know which way to go. Somebody always has to point it out. And somebody always has to, whether they're official or not. I remember I came home from college one year and we had this discussion class that met, and we got there and we waited and we waited and we waited, and the teacher never showed up. Finally, there's this one guy. He wasn't the teacher. He wasn't appointed. He didn't have any power. He didn't have any authority. But he finally sat down and said, I guess we ought to open our Bible and start our lesson now. And we had our Bible class lesson. Although it was late, we did have one. He was the leader at that point. And we needed some order out of the chaos. And that is exactly what Paul is talking about. How do you get order out of the chaos? But also, without leadership, the church is always in danger. Paul says, I know that after my departure, he tells the Ephesian elders this, I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. He said, they're going to be wolves in sheep's clothing. And it will be too late to change the result if someone is not there paying attention to the danger that's being present. And that's one reason he calls the elders at Ephesus. He said, one day this is going to happen. So you need to be on your guard about this situation. And without leadership, we are left up to our own devices to say, sounds good to me. And a very persuasive charlatan can lead people astray quite easily. But how do you choose a leader? There's some ineffective ways we choose leaders. I know that I have served on several elder selection task forces, and I'm always amazed how people choose leaders. I have known what I call the church directory system. There are people, they go through the church directory and they just put down names based upon what they see in the directory. I can tell you from firsthand experience, they have put people on there who have died. They put people on there who are not even Christians. Their spouses are Christians, but they're not Christians. And you ask yourself, how did they make that decision? And the answer is very simple. We don't do it well most of the time. There are four ways that just don't work. One is popularity. He knows a lot of people. And if he knows a lot of people, that must make him a leader. Not necessarily. Salesmen know a lot of people, but that doesn't necessarily make them a good church leader. Some it's posterity. Other words, I remember at one time, years ago, he was an elder in another church. That doesn't mean he'll make a good elder in this church. Just because someone was in a smaller church in a different situation doesn't necessarily translate. Also, it doesn't help that when people say, well, his daddy was, his daddy is not him. And just because this has been this way doesn't mean he doesn't need to become a leader in the church. Prosperity is another one that we look at. Does the man have a lot of money? Does he live in a big house? Does he own a business? Is he in a successful position in his business? I've watched this happen for years as well. And the problem was those two things don't equate. Success in the business world and being a shepherd or a wise person in the church don't necessarily match. The skills are different. They might have some overlap, but not as much as you and I think. And just because someone has a lot of money is not a really good reason to make him an elder. The final one is politics. Does he glad hand? Is he one of those people who can go around and he seems to make friends easily with everybody? And maybe he wants it too much. I have known of men who, what I call, run for the office of elder. They're out in the foyer saying, yeah, I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll help you do this. And they make miserable leaders. And so we use all of these very human dimensions to select leadership in the church. But that's why Paul writes this passage. He wants us to evaluate it differently. It's important because the leaders of the church are the mirror of what the church and its members will become. The great principle is we become like who we're around. We replicate who we are, not what we want. If you want an evangelistic church, you better have evangelistic leadership. And I don't mean talking about it either. If you want a caring church, you better have a caring leadership. Because whatever a man is what the church will become. He will replicate himself over and over again, good and bad. So be very careful. So when Paul comes to 1 Timothy chapter 3, he tries to describe the kind of person that will create the kind of church that God wants. That's the basic premise of all this. He says, this saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Couple of quick things in there. The term office is not in there. Really, the text says if anyone desires to be an elder or an overseer, he desires a noble task. That's not there. The second thing, there are three trustworthy sayings in the book of 1 Timothy. These are things you can depend on. These are things that are bedrock. These are things that don't go away, that don't change. One of them is Jesus Christ came to the world to save sinners. That's an absolute truth that doesn't change. There's also the truth that said godliness is more important than physical prowess. That's in the last chapter. But here in chapter 3, he says, if a man desires to become an overseer, that's a great thing to do. It's something that will always last and something that's always going to be right. He says he desires to be a noble task. The term desire is one of those strange words. It can mean, in context, it can mean lust, a terrible thing, to where you want it so badly you'll do almost anything to get it. But I think it buried in the seed of that moment, of that word, you get the idea. Here is a man who is willing to do anything, the hardest things, as we'll see, to do this. An overseer is nothing more than someone who inspects things. In fact, in the ancient world, the term it was used for the term building inspector. When you have a house and you're going to buy a house, one of the things you do, you contract with a building inspector. He comes in, he says, here's what works, here's what doesn't, here's what needs to be fixed, here's what you need to look at farther down the line. This is what it's like. And he's only giving you what he sees. In Latin, it comes over to supervisor, to look over. And this is the idea. I'm paying attention because no one else will if I don't. That's what an overseer does. But the New Testament describes functions, not positions. Sometimes what we say is this is a position that has power to it. The truth is this is a function that has influence to it. Those are two different statements. Church leadership is never about power and it's never about authority. It's always about influence and direction. And so the New Testament, when it talks about church leadership, we've seen the word overseer. It's important to notice there are three different terms that are used pretty much interchangeably. I think I can show that if we were in 1 Peter chapter 5. But they're pretty much interchangeable. One is an elder who the trait, the function is to provide wisdom and perspective that comes with age. A man who is not old enough cannot see enough. I honestly believe that you cannot know what life is like until you have crossed your 60th birthday. Because you know a lot more than you've ever known in your life. A shepherd is someone who cares tenderly. That's a function. Do you care for people? It's not a title, it's a function. And if you don't do the function, the title doesn't do you any good anyway. An overseer is someone who's watchful. They're paying attention to what's going on in the church. But I think the question is, it needs to be asked as we get into the discussion of what is there, what is the qualities that we're going to talk about. What is God measuring with the qualities given here? What does he want us to say this is what kind of man is? It's a it's a situation that this is not a pick and choose, by the way. A man can't be roughly 70% of these and be okay. It's an all or nothing, by the way. If he's only 70%, he's only going to be a 70% leader, one way or another. He's describing someone who is well-rounded. This is not, he is not trying to describe some things. He's not describing personality. Sometimes we believe elders ought to be introverts, extroverts rather. But what if a man is an introvert? He can sit quietly and talk to someone, but he does terribly in large crowds. That's a function of personality, by the way. He's not describing personality in these traits. Neither is he describing business success. Just because a man owns his own business, runs his own firm, is a great entrepreneur, doesn't mean a thing when it comes down to what these traits measure. That's a worldly measure, not a spiritual one. But also, they don't describe education and intelligence. A man can be highly educated and be completely foolish. I've seen that happen all my life. And so these things are measuring something else. A man who's a high school dropout may be one of the wisest men in town, one of the strongest Christians in a church. And it has nothing to do with his education, it has nothing to do with his intelligence, it has everything to do with his spirit. He's measuring spiritual qualities that build strong spiritual churches. Don't forget that point as we go through this. It's really asking, does he have the character to lead? I've learned something very important in my lifetime, and that is you can select character and you can train competence, but always select the character before the competence. I've had to hire secretaries over the years at many different times, and I have one simple rule, and that is I hire character, I train competence. If a person is not trustworthy, if a person is not honest, if a person is not a hard worker, if a person is not caring, I can't train that. That's who you are. Now, I can teach you how to use a computer. I can teach you how to file. I can teach you do a lot of things that are competencies. But if you don't have the heart for something, I can't give that to you. That's something you develop yourself. So what kind of character is being measured here? There's, first of all, his personal life. There are all these traits that Paul goes into in this passage, and we could go through one by one, or I'm going to put some of them together. It says he's above reproach. Now, man above reproach doesn't mean perfect. Perfection is beyond any of us. But this is a man who has skeletons in his closet, who could be attacked at any time. How authentic is he? How open is he? Do you know enough about the man to realize that no matter that even in his flaws, he knows what to do with them? He hasn't tried to hide anything. If a man has skeleton in his closet, it's going to come back to haunt him. He talks about being sober-minded and self-controlled. Now, the term sober-minded means it has an alcohol component to it, but what it really means is he's in control of himself and his faculties. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about alcohol. Let me give you a brief observation about alcohol in this passage. It is easy for us to quibble about things like much, or is it wrong to drink a drink every once in a while? You know, those things are not in this passage, but what it does say is that in a society like ours, where alcohol doesn't serve a positive function, destroys marriages, it destroys lives, it can harm families, and that is something that you don't want to hang around. In fact, that's one of the concepts in this passage, someone who hangs around alcohol or wine. And he talks about being self-controlled and sober-minded. He said, he is in possession of his own faculties all the time. He knows how he feels. He's not perpetually angry. He doesn't fly off the handle. He's not emotional in the sense of letting his emotions rule him. And so it is that a man has to have that kind of clarity of spirit and mental faculty to do what God wants him to do. And if he's got anything in his life that might bend that a little bit, we have a problem. He goes on to say he's respectable. Now, we've met this word before. We met it last week when it talks about women's clothing being respectable. This is orderly. This is a man who has his outward life in order and his private life in order. He's the one that you know you can depend on. He is orderly. It is not sloppy. It is not random. You know who you're going to meet when you meet them. There are some people I've met that it's really interesting because what you find out you don't know which one is going to show up that day. That's not respectable. He says you need to have some measure of consistency to your life and the way it's governed and the way it's run. And then not a drunkard and not violent but gentle. Again, are you possessed by your emotions and your passions? Is there something in your system? Is there something in your life that can tip you in the wrong direction that you need to stay away from? He talks about being gentle. This is someone who diffuses arguments. I have known people in my life who they just love a good argument. They just want to fight. And so they just have great time just kind of picking at people. This describes someone who when someone is irate, they listen patiently and diffuse the argument. They know what to do. Criticism, they know how to handle criticism. If a man can't handle criticism, he shouldn't be an elder, let me tell you. And if he can't handle criticism in a way that the person who's criticizing can come to a quietness in their own life with it, they sure haven't found the answer yet. He's not quarrelsome. He's not a lover of money. Money is not a compulsion of his life. His goal was not to value life by how much money there is. Everything's not a measure of money. Years ago, H. Ross Perot visited the University of Texas library. The library had just gotten the first edition of a Gutenberg Bible published in 1440. It's one of the few first editions that came off Gutenberg's press. It is priceless, literally priceless. But all that Perot could say was, how much do you think this thing would sell for? See, a man who is so preoccupied with money and what it looks like, and how it makes him look. And I have known men who have run their lives by saying, "Yeah, you have to look successful to be successful." This trait excludes all of that. This is a man who is in control of his faculties, in control of his urges, in control of his wants, in control of his appetites. If a man is not controlled, it'd be hard for him to leave the church and try to teach other people to be controlled. But the second thing, he says you need to look at his home life. He says he is the husband of but one wife. Now it means one woman, man, and this has been interpreted all measure of ways. But let me just do it this way. This is a measure of how faithful a man is to his wedding vows. Obviously, it excludes adultery, but divorce is a problem, and I suggest neglect of a wife may be a problem. This is a man who gives everything for his wife, who nurtures and cares for her in ways that she needs, so she responds appropriately to him. Now, we try to bend this to say, well, a man doesn't, if a man's been married and his wife dies, he can still be an elder. I've heard that discussion made. Let me give you an impression. My best asset is my wife. She can see things I can't see. And she'll tell me when I'm on the wrong track. And I'm grateful for that, because without that, all you'd have left is me. And you don't want just me. I think that's true about most church leaders as well. It says he also has to manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Now, we have reduced that to one trait. Has his children been baptized yet? But I want you to notice what Paul says. He says this is someone who has the respect of his family. Someone has said a man is a success when he has the respect of those closest to him. When the people you live with, who see every flaw that you have, every mistake that you make, every response to problems, when they come out at the end and still respect you, you know you have somebody who is doing something right. Are the children behaved? Are they under his control? Well, you see, Paul says, he says, for how can if he can't manage his household, how can he care for God's church? The home is a microcosm. It is a laboratory in which leadership is parlayed. And if he's not doing well, he won't do better in the church. Remember Jesus in the story in Matthew chapter 25, well done, good and faithful steward. You have been faithful over little, I will give you responsibility over much. He says, I want you to examine him in the smallest of classrooms, his home. If he can't lead there, he can't lead anywhere. But he goes on to describe, well, what's his church life like? He says that he's able to teach. Now, we twisted and turned that. What used to be called in the King James Version apt to teach. What Paul really says is he's always teaching. It's a present tense. He's always teaching. Does that mean formally in a class? No, not necessarily. Now, I think it's important that he be able to do that, because people need to hear elders teach in classes. That's a personal observation. But this is a man who can sit down with someone and reason with them in a way that they don't get upset and they don't get mad. He can show them the truth. They can understand it when he tells them. He can apply it to someone's life. It's something that he has to be able to show he's been able to do. It also says that he needs not to be a recent convert, lest he thinks he's important. One of the worst things that could happen would to be have a man be baptized into Christ, and a year later, because he seems to have some natural leadership abilities, he's put into an eldership. I have seen perhaps the worst problems in my life when someone is not ready for the eldership become an elder. They get overwhelmed, or they get to be bossy, which is just as bad. And so Paul says you need to let this man be seasoned some in his Christian life. You need to see what he's like. But you also need to go outside the walls of the church, outside the walls of his home, outside his own soul, and look at his effect on others who are not Christians. He says he must be well thought of by outsiders. He has to have a good reputation with his business associates and even with his business competitors. Would a business competitor describe him as fair? Maybe hard, fair. He's honest. I've always been treated right by him. Is that the response that you would get, or they go, he's just I can't stand that man. Because you see, if we're in the influence business in the church, if we're trying to influence the world into to hear the message of Christ, if a man can't do it in the area he's in, he'll never be able to do it in an area he's not. But then Paul goes on to talk about another, what we call an office, but it's really not, it's a function. And that's the deacon. He says deacons likewise must be dignified, not double-tongued, not addicted to too much wine, not greedy for dishonest gain. The term deacon is not really the best term. We don't really know what it is. But translators years ago, because they didn't know how to really translate it, took the Greek word and put English letters with it, which comes out to be deacon. And deacons have been described in the religious world as everything from the guy who is a board of directors to something else. You hear this term, though, before you get here. When you go to Acts chapter 6 and verse 2, when the disciples say to the other disciples in Jerusalem, it's not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. That's the word. This is a very practical thing. This is getting down the nuts and bolts of ministry. This is dispensing money when it has to be done. This is ladling out soup that needs to happen. This is fixing this and fixing that. This is the practical, everyday work of the church, and it's being done through what we call deacons, or those men who are serving in a basic capacity. They don't mind serving. They can be deacons the rest of their life, never become an elder, and that's okay with God. It may not be okay with us, but it's okay with God. But when you listen to what Paul says, a lot of the same qualities that describe an elder describe a deacon as well, except for three things. Three negative traits he brings up that are different. Number one, they're not double-tongued. Do you know anybody that's double-tongued? A man who's double-tongued will tell you one thing here and another thing there. You can't trust him one way or another. You don't know who he's telling what. I just want you to think about this for a moment. You're handling some very sensitive situations in the church. There's someone who is poor and they need some financial assistance. And you need to keep that confidential. Does he go out and blab everything in town? Does he tell everybody what he knows? Or is he circumspect? Paul says you don't need somebody in that position you can't trust with what they're telling people. They're not to be double-tongued. He also says they're not addicted to much wine. Here's the alcohol component again. It really means to hang around wine. It's fruitless in this passage for us to talk about how much is. And in all my life, that has been debated. I don't know how much is. Is it none? Is it a glass? Is it 4 glasses? Is it before you get inebriated? What is it? Good luck. But let me just give you an observation. If you feel like you need to hang around alcohol, you're disqualified because the word means to hang around wine, to linger over wine. It's all about where you put your priorities in the world. Is the wine, is the alcohol, is the social part of that most important to you? And can you live without it? If you can't live without it, how can you say you're not hanging around it? I know that's an opinion, and I fully take stock that that's what that is. But I think it pretty well indicates what Paul's trying to say. But the last one is not greedy for dishonest gain. These are men who are going to be handling sums of money. They would be helping people benevolently. They would be helping widows. They would be contracting for this or contracting for that. And they need to be not money centered. It doesn't need to draw their attention all the time because sometimes people can't handle money very well because it sticks to them. When I was a boy, I grew up in a small church in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was a church without elders. It was 100 members. And so the men of the church kind of had a business meeting once every 2 or 3 weeks, and they would decide various issues. And my dad was in his 30s at that time. I can't even imagine being in my 30s and doing what he had to do. But I do remember this, that we had a song leader, and the song leader was a good guy. I mean, he led singing well. He seemed to be involved, all this stuff. Today, we would have said he would have made a great deacon, but he wouldn't have. You know why? He also counted the money, the contribution after Sunday morning. Over time, it was discovered that he was taking money out of the contribution. And I remember my father and another man that I knew quite well in the church had to go confront him. And I know how difficult that was. Here's a man that he lost it all. He never counted money again, obviously, but also he didn't lead singing anymore. He loved money too much. He wanted it too badly. He needed it too badly. If a man can't live without the money, he can't live with it. So Paul says, find someone whose fingers don't stick to the money. You say, how do you figure this out? How do you know all of this? He says, let them be also tested first. Then let them serve as deacons if they prove to be blameless. Now, I've heard this trait, this idea of being tested first as filling out a form for a selection committee, and the selection committee will then ask them questions, and if they get through all those questions, they're good enough for us. Except that's not what the word means. The word means to pass through the crucible. It means to endure the heat and the pain and the suffering. When James uses this word, he said, blessed are you by the testing of your faith. It's being put under a difficult circumstance. It's watching someone over time. One of the ways we need to think about this passage is, what do you see over a long period of time that gives you confidence that any man can handle either being an elder or a deacon? How has he served in smaller terms? What has he done with difficulty? How has he dealt with with rude and ugly people. It does happen. How does he plan? How does he not plan? How does he treat his family? How does he treat the world? All of those things are part of the testing process. It's not an exam, it's an examination that life gives all of us to prove if who we are and how we do. So Paul talks about all kinds of leadership in this. But it's important to know this, that the church rises or falls on the back of its quality of leadership. And for us, we need to understand this carefully. Leadership is not about position, it's about service. We don't recognize offices, we recognize function. Because a leader who doesn't serve really doesn't lead. Jesus says the greatest among you must be the servant. He's the leader. Who's serving the most? If there's water on the ground, who's got a mop in his hand? Very simple. That's the leader. But it's important for us to study this passage, understand it, and to continue to ruminate over it, even when we're not selecting elders or deacons, because the future of the church depends on the leaders who match God's requirements, not worldly ones. I'm afraid that too many times we've applied worldly standards of leadership, whether it be political leadership or business leadership, to the church to our own detriment. God makes these qualities. We have to follow them and not impose something else upon them. Because leaders will determine the future of the church. One of the things we don't understand is you understand the quality of leadership only after they're gone. You understand 30 years from now what leadership was like today. You see the effect in the future, not the present. And the church will determine the future of leaders by what we select, by how faithful we are to what God has said and what Paul has said in this passage, by choosing men who actually fit, not that just seem like they fit. It's better, let me give you a perception. It's better not to have elders than to have bad ones. Take the time to train young men to get there, but don't just settle. For when we settle, we destroy the order God wants in His church. Next week, we're not going to have a lesson online next week. Next week is weekend of the week of the 4th of July, and I'm taking off a little bit of time during that time, and so I will not have the capacities or the time to accomplish this, but we'll still have the class the next Sunday, but you'll just miss seeing it here. But I'll be back with you 2 weeks from now as we continue our study of 1 Timothy chapter 4 and 5. So thank you for being with me. I hope you have thought deeply about what Paul has said, as I have tried to do as well. And we pray that you have a great day. And I'll see you again at our next time.